both, as I said, Australia House in London. I love some of those signs, keep your didgeridoo out of my loo. They're going pretty hard in support of Sall Grover. What can you tell us?
Well, they are indeed, Peter. We saw that protest at the front of Australia House on the weekend, and that was just one of many occasions where women here in the UK are throwing their support behind Sall Grover. Now, I was in Wales last night at the Hay Festival, a very prestigious writers' festival here in the UK, where Julia Gillard was speaking. And there were no time for questions from the crowd, which was unusual. This normally happens at these events, and it disgruntled one of the attendees who held up a sign and said that Julia Gillard is a destroyer of women's rights after the Sall Grover case handed down, because as we know, she removed the meaning of biological male and female from the Sex Discrimination Act. So there's people here in the UK throwing their support, Peter, behind Sall Grover. But this attendee, this heckler at the Y Festival, was shut down pretty quickly by the organiser and received a lot of boos, as you would expect from a crowd that was very supportive of Julia Gillard, and they spoke about that misogyny speech that we all know too well about. So it was very interesting, Peter.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard was over in the UK last week, and she was given a speech at Manchester University. And some women in the crowd had some very important questions for her. One in particular asked her if she had any regrets, essentially, about being instrumental in changing the Sex Discrimination Act to essentially erase women, erase the definition of women, and make biological sex meaningless. And now today we have seen the consequences of that when we look at Sall Grover and that long case that she's been through. She's now going to the High Court. We have some high-profile cases in Australia now that are examples of the consequences of making biological sex meaningless when it comes to legislation.
The gender debate in Australia has finally caught up with former Prime Minister Julia Gillard in the UK. Gillard, of course, presided over changes to the law that have allowed for all the ambiguity in our courts over what is a man and what is a woman. It's pretty much anything goes now, as we saw in the now infamous Tickle versus Giggle court case. Giggle is a woman's only social media platform that was founded by Sall Grover, who's now lost twice in the courts, lost her right to ban a transgender woman, that is a biological man, Roxanne Tickle, from the platform. So when Gillard spoke at Manchester University, she was asked a question about that case, the gender debate, and her role in confusing it.
When you change the sex discrimination law to reflect gender identity and not sex, meaning that women in Australia are no longer defined in law by biological sex, did you consider or reflect on some of the unintended consequences of that?
Now, this refers to the amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act legislated by the Gillard government back in 2013. This got rid of the definitions of man and woman and was explained in this way. These definitions are repealed in order to ensure that man and woman are not interpreted so narrowly as to exclude, for example, a transgender woman from accessing protections from discrimination on the basis of other attributes contained in the Sex Discrimination Act. Imagine that. It's a Sex Discrimination Act, but it refuses to narrowly define sex.
If you look at the parliamentary debates in the changes to the Sex Discrimination Act in 2012, you'll find that the issues you're referring to were not raised by anyone because they simply weren't a matter of public discourse the way they are today. So it was a different time. It wasn't something squarely before the Parliament at the time that the legislation was being amended. So I think we make an error in uplifting what we know now and public discourse now and just putting it down 14 years ago.
And with the UK leading the way to re-establishing the importance of biological sex, re-establishing the true definition of a woman when it comes to legislation. We have women in the UK helping out women over in Australia and trying to hold Julia Gillard accountable. So her answer was, it was a different time. So it is an error to uplift what we know now and the public discord now and just putting it down to 14 years ago. What was the reason for making those changes to the Sex Discrimination Act? Why disrupt it in the first place then? Why make it possible for a man to be considered a woman by law if these matters were not a factor back then? Why do it in the first place then? That answer is very dismissive when the reality is Australian women are being put through it. They are being threatened. They are being ruined financially. They are under intimidation by the very courts that should seek to protect them. The courts are now being weaponized. That legislation is now being weaponized against the very people it was written to protect. Half of the population, women. And we have not forgotten, for the longest time, Julia Gillard has refused to even say what the definition of a woman is. She has evaded that question at all costs for the longest time.
What is a woman? And do you agree with Queensland's Attorney General Minister for Women, Sharon Fentiman, that trans women are women, and with the UK's leader of the Labor Party, Sir Keir Starmer, that some women have a penis?
Look, I'm very happy to answer your question, but I do worry that, and I should just say, I spend around half of each year in the UK. And in the UK, this has turned into a kind of got you parlour game. So
maybe you can bombard them over there.
No, no, not at all. Not at all.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, no. Not at all.
Okay. This is not the time for this right now. Thank you for talking about women in politics with us this evening. Harriet, Julia, Ruth and Beth, thank you very much.
14 years ago.
Julia Gillard, you're a fucking disgrace to this country. You sold out the safety of women and children here in Australia. I now live with anxiety, Julia. I'm scared about sending my teenage daughter into a woman's space because what if she gets raped? Like the hundreds of thousands of girls who are getting raped in the UK. I bet you didn't think about them when you changed the Sex Discrimination Act and allowed grown men to wear dresses and go into women's bathrooms. So spare us the pity party. To all my followers in the UK, do not trust this woman. She's one of the reasons that this type of disgusting, perverted behaviour is allowed to be paraded in our streets.
So you mean to tell me that her being a progressive had nothing to do with the changes to the legislation that she helped implement? Clearly, this is the ideology that she has bowed to for the longest time and expected others to bow to. And women in Australia, people in Australia are being forced to bow to this ideology that they don't agree with because they simply want biological sex to be acknowledged and to be brought back into legislation so that women will no longer continue to be punished for simply acknowledging that a man cannot be a woman. Because that's what this comes down to. This legislation, these changes have allowed men, abusive men, to weaponize the courts, to weaponize the legislation and seek to punish women for simply standing up for what they know to be a fact, that you have to be female in order to be a woman, that a man should not be given the rights that were put aside for women. Pregnancy rights, for example, those are rights specific to women, specific to those who are born female. But yet, because of changes to legislation that are not rooted in reality, we are now having these rights attributed to men.
Did you ask the federal court to extend pregnancy protections to people, to transgender women?
Senator, not from my recollection.
No, so I'm asking, I was wondering to understand the status of your submission.
No, in the submissions we talked about the meaning of pregnancy and potential pregnancy and how that may apply.
So can I ask,
gender
how do you see that applying in the Act currently to trans women?
Trans women, if someone is who applies for a job, for example,
Yes.
and it is a trans woman and she may be asked whether or not she intends to have children, and if she replies, yes, I do, and then doesn't get the job because that employer doesn't want to employ women who may be of childbearing age, then she may have been subjected to unlawful discrimination on the basis of potential pregnancy.
I'm very confused. A biological male can't become pregnant.
But the grounds of pregnancy includes potential pregnancy as well as pregnancy.
But if they can't become pregnant, how can you then become potentially pregnant?
It's about the unlawful treatment by the employer. If someone is treated unfairly on the basis of pregnancy or potential pregnancy, then that is unlawful discrimination on the basis of pregnancy.
So if a bloke came in and they said, are you going to have children? Which is the same question really, and he said, oh, yeah, maybe. Are you saying that he could also claim that ground?
If he didn't receive the job because...
But they can't get pregnant?
No, not a man who is seeking a position, then it's not going to apply to a man.
Well, they're both biological men. It makes no sense. A biological man, you stated before, a biological man can't get pregnant. Am I correct? Because if I'm not, I've got to go back to school. I seriously do, because I missed that lesson in biology. I went to a convent school. The nuns may not have told me about it. But you said a biological man can't get pregnant.
That's correct, Senator. But someone who is a trans woman may be assumed to be pregnant or to be able to be pregnant.
And all this does is infringe upon the rights of women in Australia. We are seeing the consequences of that in 2026. We have women being accused of vilification for saying that men cannot breastfeed and that men should not even be attempting to breastfeed, that is child abuse. Women who are seeking to protect children, who are seeking to protect babies, are being punished by the courts and are facing hefty financial implications for simply speaking the truth and standing up for the protection of children. Imagine that. Kira Lee Smith, who is now going through her own legal battles, has been going through it for years, for simply saying that sports has categories and the women's category should be for females, for simply saying that. She's now being accused of vilification. She is now facing a hefty fine. This is what she had to say. She summed up the state of this legislation at the moment and the consequences of the changes to the legislation that Julia Gillard, the feminist Prime Minister, is responsible for. She said, I have been ordered to pay $95,000 in damages to 2 men in women's sport because I apparently hurt their feelings. It is potentially going to be doubled because I didn't pay in 30 days. So that is $190,000 in total to reward 2 men in women's sport. I am appealing in the New South Wales Supreme Court. So for now, there is a stay on the orders. Sall tweets, has been ordered to pay a man $20,000 for not allowing him on her female-only app. His hurt feelings claim is hoping to be challenged in the High Court. Sall is still waiting to see if leave will be granted for the appeal. Jasmine Sussex could have to pay up to $95,000 to a man with hurt feelings who falsely claimed he could breastfeed a tiny baby. Her case is still to be heard by a Queensland tribunal. None of these numbers include the court costs, which run into millions. Others have lost jobs, been censored, gaslit, or threatened if they speak the truth or object to the lie that men can be women. Men who wish they were women not only want to dominate our sports, spaces, and services, they are also trying to make money as they go. It appears quite lucrative if they succeed. stand with us. Men are not women, and we should never be penalised for stating the facts, especially in court, where evidence and facts are meant to be paramount. So Julia Gillard, rather than trying to just dismiss these concerns, if you really want to rectify the damage that your government did in 2013, you need to speak to your buddies in the government today, speak to the current Labour government and get them to change this legislation to acknowledge biological sex. Get them to repair the damage that you did. If you truly want to make amends, so to speak, the only way to do that is not to be dismissive and say it was a different time, which helps nobody. The only way is to use your influence, use the fact that you are a former Prime Minister, and get this legislation changed back. Speak up for Sall Grover. Speak up for Kira Lee Smith. Speak up for Jasmine Sussex. Stop BSing people. How about that? These are real life consequences that Australian women are dealing with today. So Sall Grover told The Australian on Thursday that Miss Gillard's comments should prompt action from the government to reform the Act. The onus is now on Albanese to do something, and he will regret it if he doesn't. History will judge him. People want this. This is a very easy political win. Gender ideology has taken down politicians all over the world. We're no different here. I think he should show that he is capable of actually listening to Australian citizens and doing something that we want. Everybody knows that men aren't women, including the people that have been involved in doing the harm.
I'm often asked if I regret taking this stance and giving up years of my life, having to raise and spend millions of dollars in legal fees, get called a bigot, and basically derail my career. Wouldn't it have been easier to just pay him $20,000, let him on the app, and accept that the word woman has evolved? No. It isn't easier to submit to an ideology you know isn't true, to give up your rights and watch society crumble under the weight of nonsense. When I was pregnant and having to decide whether or not to fight, I knew that I was having a daughter. And I knew that I would have to teach her to stand up for herself. And I couldn't do that if I backed down the first time it really mattered.
From Australia, CEO Rachel Wong. Rachel, at first I think this is quite extraordinary, but it feels like, reading her comments more in full, that she's trying to still have a bet each way, that yes, okay, they made the changes to the law, but we just didn't really quite, see what was going to happen, when I think pretty much everybody at the time did see what was going to happen.
Look, I think you're right. I think she is trying to keep a foot in both camps. I think that given in the past, in relation to these questions, she would sort of say, oh, that's kind of a gotcha question, and wouldn't really answer it. I think there has been a little bit of progress. I think she is starting to acknowledge that there are some issues that have come about as a result of the amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act back when her government was in power. And I think that she's basically acknowledging that there wasn't really a full debate about those issues at the time. And so I think that is some progress. I think the fact that her saying, well, it was a different time, is clearly a cop-out. And at the end of the day, it's less about whether the consequences were foreseen at the time, which obviously is important, but more about the fact that now that they are abundantly clear, where we have women being sexually assaulted in prisons by men identifying as women, we have women and girls being injured in sports by the same. Now that the consequences are abundantly clear, is the current government going to do anything about it? And judging by this week, where Labor and the Greens banded together to block not one but two bills to restore sex-based protections to the Act, I think the answer is probably no at this stage. I think that the fact that one of the architects of the changes to the Act, or at least the person who was in charge of the government that passed those amendments, is now starting to make comments that seem like, well, maybe there is an issue and maybe we didn't realise at the time, but now clearly something is going on. I think the fact that she has made those comments should give warning to the current Labor government that they actually need to look at this, as opposed to doing what they're doing, which is to continue to fob it off and ignore women and ignore women's advocates. I think it should make a difference. Whether it will, I'm not so sure.
So thankfully, women like Sal, Kira Lee, Jasmine, they will continue to fight, while the legislators try and sort themselves out. Hopefully they will. But in the meantime, it is real Australian women in 2026 who are dealing with the consequences, who are dealing with the financial costs. It cannot be easy. And I commend these women for continuing to fight. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video. And a huge thanks to all of those who have hyped my videos. It is greatly appreciated.